Hi, I'm Megan Finnerty with USA Today and the Storytellers Project, and it is my heart's joy to welcome you to tonight's show. We so appreciate you taking a chance on live storytelling and sharing your evening with us. Tonight, we are joining the entire USA Today network to bring you stories from 6 powerful women. These women are national leaders and hometown sheroes. That's right, I made a joke about sheroes. They are visionaries, iconoclasts, founders. Tonight's show is part of the USA Today Network's marking of the 100th anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment, which led some American women to have the right to vote. I would like to introduce my co-host, Philana Patterson. She's the Women of the Century Project Director, and she's one of USA Today's managing editors. Hi, Philana.
Hi, Megan. Thank you.
Well, Thanks for being here.
I'm happy to be here and very happy to have worked on the Women of the Century Project. The USA Today Network assembled expert panels representing the 50 states, Washington, D.C., and the 5 permanently inhabited territories to select more than 500 women who've made a major difference in American life since the 19th Amendment passed. A national panel of experts then selected 100 women who best exemplify the progress, grit, and courage that have advanced women's lives for the past 100 years.
Since 2016, the Storytellers Project has brought more than 100 shows to communities across the country, but we've had to cancel our in-person season because of obviously the coronavirus. While we know it feels unsafe to be together in theaters, it feels necessary to be together online. And we'd like to introduce our storytellers. Philana?
Our tellers are Dr. Mona Hanna-Attisha, who spoke up to protect children being poisoned in Flint, Michigan, linguist Jessie Baird, and immigration advocate Cristina Jiménez, both recipients of the MacArthur Fellowship, often called the Genius Grant. Also telling tonight are Helen, LGBT civil rights advocate, author, and journalist who helped America's Asian civil rights movement, Nancy Brinker, founder of the Susan G. Komen Foundation and former U.S. ambassador to Hungary, and Margaret Carter, the first Black woman elected to Oregon's legislature.
Ladies, we are so excited to have you! Okay, so you guys should know, our audience should know, tonight is not a TED Talk. We love TED, but it's just not what this is. It's not Toastmasters. It's not a how-to. It's not an inspirational speech, an educational lecture, or a slideshow. We are only going to try to sell you subscriptions to local market publications. Instead, what we're really doing here is storytelling, and storytelling is predicated on a visit. We want you to open your heart and receive these stories in the spirit in which they're intended. We hope that you can hear them just like you'd hear your friend talking to you, someone you're curious about, someone you want to feel closer to. We truly invite you to do that here tonight. Some of these stories are going to be conversational and casual, and some are going to be really polished and professional. What we want you to know is that this is how each of these women naturally talks. This is how community connecting and community change really happens when we receive people as they are. We believe creating empathy and understanding is vital at all times, but especially so in times like this, where there's lots of insecurity and uncertainty. With that, Philana is going to bring up our first storyteller.
Our first storyteller for tonight is Dr. Mona Hanna-Attisha. Mona has a story about a day at the office that changed a whole city.
Thank you, Philana, and thank you for this opportunity to share my story. We can probably all think of those moments in our lives that have shaped us and defined us, that have changed our worldview and set us on our current paths. For me, one of those moments was when I was just 10 or 11 years old. My family and I were recent immigrants to this country, and my parents were always desperate for any news from back home. And I remember sitting one night with my father, and I can still smell the cigarette smoke and hear the constant static of the shortwave radio. My dad was always tuning the knobs, hoping to pick up something, anything, about what was happening in Iraq. Although my parents knew firsthand of the atrocities of Saddam Hussein, the world had yet to learn his name. Leafing through a newspaper, my father then turned to me and shared a photograph. It was a picture of a beautiful, chubby baby girl wrapped in a pink blanket, lying on the ground with her father. They had died in each other's arms. My parents explained to me that it was a chemical weapons attack in Halabja, a Kurdish village in northern Iraq. 5,000 people died that day. An entire city was poisoned by its own government. I have never forgotten that moment, and I never will. That's when I learned that leaders could be dangerous, especially towards certain populations. And that's when I learned to stay vigilant against injustice. But I was in America now, and it was going to be different. I woke up literally every day grateful to be in this country, and as such, committed myself to service, to medicine, and to the most vulnerable among us. I was largely raised in Michigan and ended up in Flint for my medical training over 20 years ago. And you may think of Flint now as that city with brown water coming out of their kitchen taps. Do you guys remember those pictures? But before the water crisis, Flint was famously known as the birthplace of cars and the middle class, and also for what followed, like in so many of our cities: disinvestment, unemployment, poverty, racism, greed, neglect, and indifference. Decades of man-made crises. And that left Flint in a near bankrupt state. And if you remember, Flint's democracy was taken away and the city became under the control of unelected emergency managers. And they decided that one way to save money would be to change our water source from the Great Lakes to the Flint River. So in April of 2014, our former mayor went on TV, pressed a button, and then, surrounded by a bunch of other men in suits, they raised their glasses full of Flint water. As you know, that toast did not herald good tidings. The Flint River water was missing an important ingredient called corrosion control. And it was so corrosive that within a few months, General Motors noticed its engine parts corroding, and the company was allowed to switch back to Great Lakes water. And I'm going to say that again because every time I say it, I can't believe it. Our drinking water was corroding engine parts. Yet the people of Flint who knew something was wrong were told to relax, that everything was in compliance. During this time when all this was happening, I was wrapped up in my world as a pediatrician, a busy mom, a wife, juggling so many balls in the air, just like so many of you do. And I remember one day in clinic, when little Nikala came in for her 4-month checkup, and I'll never forget this day. After listening to her heart and her lungs and peeking into her tiny ears and sneaking a smile and a babble, Nikala's mother shared that she was going to start formula feeding. And you make formula by mixing powder with water. And then, with a look in her eyes that I see in the eyes of all parents who are worried about their kids, she asked, "Is the water safe?" Reflexively, I said, "Of course the water is safe. How could our water not be safe?" I thought to myself, we are in America. This is the richest country in the history of the world. It's the 21st century. It's Michigan. We are literally surrounded by the Great Lakes, the largest source of fresh water in the world. But despite all that, there's rules and regulations and people, experts and scientists who wake up every day to make sure that when I turn on my tap and when you turn on your tap, that the water is safe to drink. I thought, but I was wrong. The water wasn't safe. And by now you all know about the Flint water crisis. It's hard to believe, but it's a story that happened here in one of our great American cities. I stopped reassuring my patients when I heard about the possibility of lead in our water. That is when my life changed. As a pediatrician, I know, and most of you know, that lead is a poison. It erodes cognition, it twists behavior. It changes who you are and who you may become. There is no safe level. The corrosive water was eating away at our lead pipes. And knowing there was lead in our water, filling baby bottles and sippy cups, ate away at me too. I literally stopped eating. I lost about 30 pounds. I couldn't sleep. I drank way too much coffee. I was feeling anger and fear and despair and guilt and heartache, a roller coaster of emotions. And I knew that it was not only my professional obligation as a doctor, but my moral and ethical duty, my civic responsibility to do something. That's how my parents raised me, to never look away, to do the right thing, even if it is the hard thing. Working around the clock, I analyzed our hospital medical records to find what I honestly didn't want to find, that yes, there was more lead in the blood of our children. So armed with that research, I walked out of my clinic with my white coat on and stood up at a press conference sharing that our children were in harm's way. And let me tell you, this is not something that doctors or scientists usually do. And I was pretty sure that everybody could hear my heart pounding through the microphone. I was sharing science and facts, but I was attacked, dismissed, and discredited. Can you imagine being in the middle of a public health crisis and ignoring science and the public's health? Multiple state officials said I was wrong, unfortunate, and even hysterical. I felt defeated and so unbelievably small. And for a quick minute, I began to doubt myself. I started to believe them. But I also believed in my Flint kids, like Nikala. It took a while, but finally, persistence, teamwork, and science spoke truth to power and helped expose our disaster. I can't go into the details of what the impact of the water crisis and lead exposure will have on every child because it will be different for every kid. But with the same speed and urgency that drove the uncovering of the crisis, it has continued in our recovery. The damaged pipes are being replaced. That will be done this year, which is amazing. And as for the kids, when I realized that there was no magic pill that I could prescribe to take the crisis away, and gosh, I wish there was, I went back to the science of what kids need to be healthy. So now in Flint, we have things like expanded healthcare access and home delivery of children's books, new childcare centers, school health services, food prescriptions, trauma-informed care, living wage recovery jobs, and so much more. But we still have a lot of work ahead of us. But that made me realize that these awesome things that we are doing in Flint are the things that all kids need to be healthy. Yet across this country, too many of our children wake up to similar nightmares, growing up in places poisoned by inequities, as if their lives don't matter. But it doesn't have to be this way. And that has been the most powerful ripple effect of my story. Turning a moment into a movement, creating a playbook of resistance and hope, and demanding that we build a place where the dreams of all of our children really do come true. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mona, for your story and for your work in service of Flint's children's, and now your leadership on behalf of all children.
Thank you.
Thank you. We so appreciate your story. Mona's story really models civic leadership at a grassroots level. And I know that I'm one person who certainly hopes to see myself reflected in the courage that you showed in your story. Our next storyteller, I'm taking Falana's part. I'm sorry. Falana, it's your turn to go.
Megan, I gotta watch you. So next up is Jessie Baird. Jessie has a story about a mid-career pivot that changed her life.
Wanina Khan, Natasuis Jessie Quiniquais, Tomas Masipiat Ka Wonk Yuyunatai Katwat, Ninka Kutamokiainan Ka Wonk Sonkashkwata Masipi Wataki Mo and that. Good evening. The language that you just heard is Wampanoag Tuang, the language of my people, the Wampanoag people. I am from the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe, and I live in Kituit. And I'm also the vice chairwoman of the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe. And tonight I'm going to talk to you about a point in my life's work that stays with me often, and I think it's important to share. So the language that you just heard, Wampanoag Tuang, wasn't spoken for 150 years. Now, the language, while it was given to us by Manat, by Creator, the same as our land was, the same as our children are, they're hooked together. We are our language, we are our land, we are our children, and it is all inseparable, but all gifts from Creator. And like any other gift, it has responsibilities too. One of the responsibilities of a speaker, we believe, is that when Creator gives you a language, when you leave your body, when you die and you go home, you are expected to present yourself to your people in that language, in the gift of language that was given by Creator. But we couldn't do that for 150 years. So while the language was encouraged right through the 1800s, the colonists came here on the Mayflower. So when you hear about the Indians and the Pilgrims, we're the Indians. We're that nation that was here then, and we're still here now. And our language was celebrated by the colonists then. Eventually, it was discouraged because I think because the tribe used it in ways that would protect the land under our feet, and that became inconvenient for the colonists. So eventually the language was not spoken anymore. Then in 1993, I had a vision. I'm not going to talk a lot about a vision tonight, but just safe to say that it's not the same as a dream. You're not asleep, but you're not awake. And in my vision, I was seeing people that I knew. I didn't know them personally, but I could recognize sort of which family or clan they were from. And they were speaking to me, and I didn't know what they were saying. At the time, I worked in human services. I worked with homeless families, and I really enjoyed my work. And I wasn't really sure what was going on. And this vision actually went on for 3 nights in a row. And I just found that it was curious, but I didn't understand what was happening. And then one day I was driving down the road, and I saw the sign for a village called Sipawisit, which we now pronounce Sipawisit, the place of the brook. And I'm not really sure why, but in that specific moment in time, when my soul made the connection that what I was hearing in my vision could have been Wampanoag, it was like someone lit a fire inside of my soul. I can't explain it more than that there was a pull. There was an inextricable pull to language. And I didn't know anything about language or linguistics. I didn't know about the Wampanoag language. I've seen all of these place names. A lot of places are still named for Wampanoag places. But when you grow up within the forest, you don't always see the trees. Just hadn't thought about it. So I started doing some research, and I realized, hey, if this is going to happen, if you're going to work on language, this is going to have to be a community effort, and we're going to need someone to be trained. But before that, we thought, oh, we'll hire a linguist, but we just couldn't afford one. So that vision led me actually to a fellowship at MIT, and then a 3-year master's program in Algonquian linguistics. And the community was working really hard to sort of make plans to reclaim a language. And we were getting a lot of pushback from people. Why would you do this? Are you giving your children a disadvantage? Isn't English good enough? Sort of all of the things, I guess, that my grandparents heard when they were pressured to stop using language, and policies were made when the language ceased to be spoken. However, luckily, they left us hundreds of documents, our grandparents did, written in our language. So it made reclamation possible. We didn't know at the time that it had never been done before. And had I known that, I may have just been too afraid to do the work, but I didn't know any better. And I found that working on language helped me to feel as though I was fighting oppression, and reclamation was bringing something back. And Wampanoag people, and specifically my tribe, is constantly fighting to keep the land under our feet. And reclamation of language is no less important because it's no less of a gift from God than the land under our feet. So I went off to school, and because we're a tribe and because we were working on this all together, the idea was to develop lessons that could be learned by anybody in the community each week. So while I was learning something each week, I would develop a lesson that could be taught to a person at home. And we had people from several communities coming. And I would say maybe 6 months or so into the first year, a young woman approached me. And she was from the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe. And she said, hey, cuz, we call each other cuz, she was my cousin, so appropriate. I'd like to come to class. But she said, sometimes I had a difficult time in school and it's left me feeling intimidated. Sometimes when I'm in a classroom setting, I get really scared. And I want to come to language class and I want to learn my language and I want to learn to present myself in my own language, but I'm afraid you'll call on me and I won't do well. And I said, hey, come to class, hang out, visit. I won't call on you. You can just chill, have some snacks with the rest of us and enjoy yourself. And so she started coming. And she was incredible in class. Some of your speakers learn by reading sort of visually. Some learn tactilely. Some are auditory learners. She was just a natural with language. And she was incredibly beautiful, a young mom, and a championship powwow dancer, and a princess. And her name was Alicia Clayash Johnson. And about, 7 months after she started class, she had been really sick and just sort of let it go, I think, for a little bit. But she was a lot sicker than any of us thought. And she had cancer. And so she was at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, and she asked to see me. And there were other women in the community that wanted to go there and make prayers for her and see her and other cousins and things. So we went to see Alicia, and she was so small and fragile, laying in her bed. And she said to me, Jessie, I'm going to die. But when I do, and when I go home, and when I go back to where our people came from, I will be able to present myself and say my name in my given language. And she said, I want to thank you for that. And I think this was one of the greatest honors of my life and of this work, that I was able to accompany this young person on her journey to language reclamation and to bring language back to the other side, back to our place in creation. And some days this work is really hard, and sometimes it's really lonely, and I'm still learning. I'll learn for the rest of my life. But that one moment helps me to go. And when people ask why, because it's the good and right and clean and holy thing to accompany someone on language reclamation. And I'm really grateful to my cousin, Alicia Clayash Johnson, Anach, Gatap Tontomash. Thank you.
Jessie, thank you so much for your story. Thank you for introducing us to Alicia. What a model of generosity to your people and to all people to create this gift or reclaim it It is a joy, and it is a hard story to hear too, to hear your story and to see the change you've created, not just for your people, but for everyone doing the work of dismantling colonialism. So thank you for joining us tonight.
Top touch.
Falana?
Our next teller is Nancy Brinker. She's founder of Susan G. Komen and co-founder of the Promise Fund of Florida. Nancy has a story about her sister. Please tell us your story, Nancy.
Alana. Boy, in 1946. Not only did I have two of the best parents in the world, I also had an older sister, Susie, who was my best friend. It was an optimistic time with World War II coming to an end, but it was also a time of great fear. The polio virus was spiking, scared parents left kids at home, and words like epidemic and quarantine were part of our daily life. I'm sure this sounds familiar. But in our house, big problems weren't to be avoided, they were to be confronted. And as my dad would say, never quit. Most people don't succeed, not because they are not smart or resourceful, he said, but because they quit. So every Saturday, my mother would load Susie and I in the back of her old Woody station wagon, and she volunteered at one of her many charities. And every Saturday, Susie and I would complain because we wanted to go swimming. It was really hot in Peoria. One such Saturday, Mom had enough of our complaining. She pulled the car over to the side of the road and said, "Girls, get out." Outside of the car, Mom said something that I remember to this day. She pointed her finger and said, "Girls, people have died for our country, and all you're being asked to do is to give a little something back. Can you be a good steward of your country?" Well, Mom's words hung in the air, and then Susie whispered to me, "Just say yes so we can go swimming." So I did, I got it. But we did take that lesson to heart. And later on decided to put on a variety show in our backyard to provide help for friends with polio. Susie sold the tickets, and I did the song and dance routine. I gave it all my heart. Afterwards, Susie threw her arms around me and said, "Next time I think I should sing and dance, and you should sell the tickets." We raised $64 that day from 64 neighbors, and this was one of the most joyous moments in my life. As I grew older, Susie and I remained close, very close. So one night she called me with the news that she had breast cancer, and I was devastated. For the next 3 years, I accompanied Susie on her trips to MD Anderson Cancer Center, where we were lucky enough to be one of the few patients seen in those days in the breast clinic. And I'm still haunted by what we saw there. Susie had the best care from professional doctors, and yet we watched dozens of women, either poor or recent immigrants or non-English speakers, huddled in small waiting areas for hours and sometimes days. They just wanted to see the doctor. It wasn't right. And Susie summed it up perfectly when she said, "Where a woman lives shouldn't determine whether she lives." A few months later, it was clear that Susie didn't have much time left. And before she died at the age of 36, she took my hand and said, "Man, we've got to do something to help other women. I want you to do everything you can to find a cure for this disease. Promise me that you'll try." I promised her, and that promise became the passion of my life. If I had focused on what I was up against, I probably wouldn't have been able to start it. But my father's words, "Don't ever quit," were still with me. So I started an organization named in Susie's honor, Susan G. Komen. It began as a small group of women in my living room. We had $200, a shoebox full of index cards, and a broken typewriter. And that was fine because our volunteer secretary later admitted she didn't know how to type. We were like an internet startup, minus the internet. But we didn't quit. We built an organization based on Susie's heart, our stubbornness, and eventually thousands and thousands of volunteers. In the years that followed, we raised and invested over $3 billion. $1 billion of it was invested into research that helped young scientists better understand and treat diseases like metastatic breast cancer. And the rest went into education, screening, and treatment programs in over 140 cities around the world. And we helped lead to a 40% decline in the death rate for breast cancer from 1989 to 2017. We were lucky to make an extraordinary impact, but I knew we weren't addressing the whole problem. And we couldn't do that without attacking the problem of healthcare disparities. There are too many women who lack access to basic information and access to healthcare. And as a result, for too many women, the diagnosis comes way too late. And so later in my life, as ambassador to Hungary, chief of protocol for the United States, I worked to spread that information around the globe. When I arrived in Hungary, breast cancer was the leading cancer cause of cancer death among Hungarian women. So we raised awareness. One night, we lit their beautiful chain bridge in the middle of their town pink, and hundreds of women lit candles and crossed it. Because we didn't quit, 4 years later, breast cancer had dropped to third place as a cause of death. Not because of new treatments, but because of better awareness and early detection. The lesson has stayed with me to this day. And now, as I embark on the last quarter of my life, I've renewed my promise to Susie through the organization I co-founded and love called the Promise Fund of Florida. Florida is my home now, but it's also home to devastating inequities in its healthcare system. Over the past 5 years, 15,000 Florida women died from breast and cervical cancer, most of whom had unmet needs. In fact, one organization ranked Florida last of all states in government resources available for women in healthcare. In my county, there are an estimated 140,000 women who do not have health insurance and therefore much less likely to access life-saving preventive screenings. The Promise Fund aims to prevent unnecessary deaths of breast and cervical cancer, and we do this by funding community-based patient navigators who are in high-risk communities. They provide women with education, screening, and they understand their social determinants of health care, including language barriers, and they're there to give them a hug. These navigators aren't just talking to communities, they are living in communities, building trust and walking hand in hand with people in need. Eventually, I believe the Promise Fund will become a gold standard model that can be implemented throughout the country, community by community, addressing the disparities I saw so long ago, 42 years ago, with my sister. Increasing access to care for the most at-risk populations is the best and least expensive way to improve healthcare outcomes. I believe it must represent the future of healthcare. We can't wait for high-risk patients to come to us. We have to go to them. I started the Promise Fund because I knew there was still more to do. I'm still out there hustling, dealing with rejection, and working to prove young people and older people who say it can't be done. I've learned that resilience and determination are the only way I know how to live, and the only way I've been able to fulfill the promise I made to Susie so long ago. Someone recently asked me why I was still doing this. You should retire, they said. But retirement isn't an option. I think of my idol, Professor Marie Curie, the only scientist to ever win Nobel Prizes in both physics and chemistry in 1903 and 1911. And when World War I broke out, already elderly, she knew her work on radioactivity and X-rays could save the limbs and lives of soldiers in France, but she couldn't get anyone in the government to listen. So she began outfitting cars borrowed from her friends with very primitive X-ray equipment. She called them petite Curies, and she trained more than 150 people on how to operate these early vans. Then they drove those ambulances out to the front lines, saving millions of lives and limbs. Today, our front lines aren't battlefields. They are communities near our own homes. And my commitment is to honor the memory of brave women like Marie Curie, like all of you, and fulfill my promise to Susie. Before my mother died, she joined me at a White House ceremony honoring leaders in public service. And as I looked at her sitting next to me and my son, Eric, who was Susan G. Komen's first and longest serving volunteer, I hope she knew that the words she shared one morning were carried with me my whole life, and we're now living inside Eric too. Be a good steward for your country, she said. And in the words of my father, never, ever quit. Thank you.
Nancy, thank you so much for your story.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for your advocacy, your work, introducing us to your family. Like I feel like I know so much more about your mom because she's that kind of mom who turns around in the car and then inspires her children for a lifetime. Every mother here listening is like, oh, that could happen to me tomorrow. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much. And I do want you guys to know it was not me that told Nancy to retire, but it was me that was surprised when she said that she still gets rejections and that people still don't always believe in her. And so, Nancy, I want to thank you. Thank you for continuing to hustle on behalf of Florida, on behalf of all of us who are looking to you.
Thank you, Megan. Thanks for asking me.
Yeah. Awesome. Falana, take it away.
Thank you. So next up is Helen Zia. Helen has a story about finding her voice and using it. Take it away, Helen.
Hi, I'm so humbled to be here. And I'm going to tell the story about a girl who felt so invisible because everywhere she went with her family, herself, people stopped and stared as though they were hideous aliens from Mars. Even though that girl was born and raised in New Jersey, people were always telling her, go back where you came from. Or they seemed shocked that she could even speak English. And of course, that girl was me. That's what it was like to grow up as an Asian American child, the daughter of immigrants from China in the latter part of the 20th century. Because for a long time, immigrants from Asia weren't even allowed to become citizens of America. They were seen as rats, as people who ate rats, as people who carried disease, as people who could never be decent or loyal Americans. And they couldn't vote or even become part of this democracy. It wasn't until 1952, the year that I was born, that the last of those barriers were torn down. Unfortunately, the discrimination against people who look like me continued. And I grew up wondering whether I even belonged in America because people were so often telling me to go back or that I was a foreign invader. But I also grew up at a time when there were great movements for social change. And they were taking place then. The civil rights movement was in full bloom. Dr. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Rosa Parks, they all spoke to me, even though I was a little yellow girl. I heard the calls for women's equality, for an end to war, for gay liberation, and I wanted to be part of all of them. They were cries for freedom and democracy, to make America a better place for all people. Now, my parents struggled to raise 6 kids, and I knew I would have to get a scholarship if I hoped to go to college. And boy, did I want to go to college. I wanted to be part of those movements. And so as soon as I got to college, I searched for and found other students of color who also wanted to make a difference. And I found other Asian American kids who were like me. After college, I thought about becoming a doctor because that's what the kids of immigrants think about. But my heart was set on being a community organizer, and I threw myself into feminist activism to end sexism as well as racism. I actually became part of an effort to integrate the construction trades, which were then all white, all male, and very highly paid. And I actually became a construction laborer in 1976. I was one of the first women of color to break that barrier. And one day, a fellow activist said to me, if you really want to know about making social change in America, you should go to the heartland of America. I was young. I thought that was a great idea. And I packed up and I moved to Detroit, Michigan. I thought I would be part of the great trade union movement, the labor movement of America. And I soon got a job working at one of the big 3 auto companies as a large press operator, stamping out steel hoods, doors, all those steel parts that go into making a car. And I actually did that for a number of years, working alongside Black, Arab, white workers. We got to know each other well. We shared our joys and our woes. And I organized among my fellow workers to end apartheid in South Africa and to end racism in America. None of those issues especially focused on Asian Americans. And it didn't really seem to matter that here I was, an Asian American young woman, organizing in a place where there were not so many people who looked like me back then, until it just didn't seem to matter. Until one day it did matter, because a terrible economic crisis took place. It hit America, centered on the Midwest and the auto industry. What happened was that nobody could afford to buy their gigantic American gas-guzzling dinosaur cars, and the auto industry collapsed, along with the entire supply chain. I and millions of other workers in America were suddenly out of work, and it seemed like we would never find another job because that crisis went on for years. By 1982, it was year 3 of that economic recession, and the politicians, the corporate heads, the media, even the unions, my union, agreed on one thing, that they would blame Japan for all of America's woes. So it was like declaring war against Japan. In fact, they called it a war, and people of Japan were the enemies. People who drove Japanese-made cars were shot at on the freeways. People who looked Japanese were like a moving target. And why was that? Because Japan was able to produce good fuel-efficient cars. Now, so was Germany, but for people to use racism and xenophobia and to scapegoat other people, they have to look different. And so everyone was frustrated. Everyone was miserable and suffering and angry at anyone who looked Japanese. In that climate of hate, that anger boiled over when a young Chinese American man named Vincent Chin was beaten to death with a baseball bat by 2 white auto workers who saw him and said, "It's because of you, mother F's, that we're out of work." Vincent Chin was out for his all-American bachelor party that night with his buddies. His 400 wedding guests went to his funeral instead. And that would have been tragic enough. But then the judge sentenced the 2 murderers to probation and said, "These are not the kind of men you send to jail." Well, all of Detroit rose up in outrage, because who are the kind of men you send to jail for murder in a city that's majority African American? Yet there were no Asian American voices to speak up against this climate of hate that led to the killing of a Chinese American whose only crime was looking Japanese. You see, back in the 1980s, Asian Americans weren't united. There wasn't even a word like Asian American. There were Americans who were Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Vietnamese, Filipino, Indian, Pakistani, and so many other heritages from Asia. But there was no NAACP or National Organization for Women to speak for Asians. Now, by this time, I had discovered my voice as a journalist to write about the stories and the people that I saw. And since I suspected that anti-Asian racism might have had a little bit of a role to play in this murder, I contacted the Chinese American leaders who were mentioned in those news stories. And one of the first meetings I went to was at the restaurant where Vincent Chin had worked as a waiter. I didn't know anybody in that room, but they were all asking the same question. What can we do? What can we do about this injustice? When there wasn't any organization that ever had advocated for Asian Americans for them before. Vincent Chin's mother, Lily, was in the room, sobbing. Her heart was broken. It was as though her son had been killed again when the judge sentenced his murderers to freedom. The handful of Asian American lawyers in Michigan were also in the room, and one by one, they said, "There's really nothing that can be done if a judge doesn't agree to change his sentence," and they never do that. And I could feel the energy just sort of leaving the room as each one said, there's nothing we can do. There's nothing we could do. And I wondered to myself at that moment, is this going to end here because there's nothing to be done? And I slowly felt my hand going up, raising my hand, even though I had the sinking feeling that I was about to destroy my brand new journalism career because reporters weren't supposed to even act like they had an opinion. But my hand went up and I said, we might not be able to change the judge's sentence, but we have to let everyone know that this injustice is something Asian Americans cannot stand for. And then I put my hand down. Well, Vincent's mother, Lily Chin, stopped crying. Instead, she stood up and she said, that's right. We must let all Americans know that this is wrong. Lily Chin was just so destroyed by grief, yet she bravely led what would become a national civil rights movement of Asian Americans, bringing together all these different groups who then joined hands with Black Americans, with Latinx people, with women, with LGBT people, with people of all faiths and all walks of life to stand together for something called justice in America. It was such an honor for me to work alongside of Lily Chin and so many people to fight for justice. And that civil rights movement was really a shining example of multiracial and multicultural unity to do something together with common ground of all people that brings about a positive change. This movement brought about a change for all Americans. For example, in Michigan, the right for a victim to speak in court at a sentencing was known as the Vincent Chin Rule. And it became part of a movement that's led to victim impact statements that women and the Me Too movement have used so powerfully against sexual assault. This Asian American civil rights movement also helped to broaden the understanding of what hate crimes in America are, and that they protect now against all kinds of hate, including those that involve gender, sexual orientation, disability, and immigrants like Vincent Chin. The legacy of that civil rights movement is still carried on today and has great meaning today when there is also the beginning of an economic recession that we are all facing, and that's compounded by a pandemic and a public health crisis. We're also seeing a new wave of hate affecting so many different groups, continuation of violence against Black Americans, and an intense rising tide of anti-Asian racism directed against people who look Chinese, because some of our leaders are saying that they should be blamed for not only the virus, but everything that's happening to America today. Now, all I did back then was to raise my hand and to say that all people deserve the right to live with dignity, to have justice, and to live without violence. I raised my hand, and everybody can raise their hand, and we all must. Thank you so much. It's my honor to be here. Thank you.
Helen, thank you so much for your work and your lifetime dedicated to the safety, the equality, justice for so many people. It is deeply stirring to hear your story and to receive it this evening.
Thank you.
It is really powerful to hear the echoes of the past in what Helen has obviously pointed out is happening around us today. And that's why we believe storytelling is such a powerful medium, because stories are sort of always with us, right? It's always the present. Thank you for that, Helen. Falana, take us into the next story.
Thank you. So next up is Cristina Jiménez. Cristina has a story about growing up in New York City. Thank you for being here, Cristina. The floor is yours.
Thank you. And it's such an honor to be with all these powerful, powerful women. My family and I came to this country when I was 13 in 1998. We fled poverty as Ecuador was in the middle of a political and economic crisis. Without jobs, my family struggled to pay for food and for school. Both of my parents dreamed of going to college, but both of them came from working class families and they could not achieve that dream. So when we moved to New York, it was their dream that their children would have not only food and shelter in this country, but also an education. And that was my dream too. I worked hard in school, and in high school, I was getting ready to apply for college. One day, I met with my college advisor. And one of the first questions she asked me was, do you have a social security number or do you have a green card? To which I said, no. Then she asked me, do your parents have a social security number and a green card? To which I responded, again, no. She then said, you cannot go to college because you're undocumented, and I cannot help you. She then said, next, calling on to the next student. It was horrifying. I went home crying to share the news with my mom. I dropped my book bag on the floor, threw myself in bed, and just cried. But then my mom said that I needed to go back to school and find someone else who could help me. If not, she will go to school herself and find some help. As a teenager, I was mortified that she will go to school. After 9/11, New York eliminated in-state tuition, which is a policy that allowed undocumented students like me to pay in-state tuition rates. Given that the policy was eliminated, now I was supposed to pay as an international student an astronomical sum of money. One of my ESL teachers helped me to figure out how to apply for the City University of New York. And in that journey, I also found community organizations and labor unions that were advocating for students like me. In awe, I remember reading in the newspapers about undocumented students that were fasting to pressure policymakers in New York and the governor to change this policy. And in 2002, a few weeks before my first semester in college started, New York Governor Pataki signed a new law guaranteeing in-state tuition for all students, regardless of immigration status. I cried of happiness that I will be able to go to college. So I began my first semester in college in 2002. And even though I could pay in-state tuition, I wasn't able to get financial aid because undocumented students could not have access to it. So my mom took on an additional job at a nail salon in addition to cleaning homes. And I sold Avon products and helped her to clean houses over the weekend. At this time, I also got involved in campaigns to stop the deportations of two young immigrants, Kamal from New York and Marie from Missouri. They got caught up in the post-9/11 immigration enforcement regime that specifically target Muslims, immigrants for deportation and detention. So we came together and spoke up, shared their stories in public, spoke to the media about it, pushed members of Congress, and put pressure on ICE and the agency to make sure that they were allowed to stay. After these efforts, Marie and Kamal were able to stay here in the United States, their home. But it was a bittersweet moment because Marie's parents were deported. In 2006, one of my greatest fears became a reality. I was awakened by a call early in the morning from a friend who told me that our friend Walter was in a detention camp and will be deported. I broke down into tears, and I felt so overwhelmed by the possibility that I may not see Walter again. Walter was from Guatemala and came to this country with his family when he was 11 years old. Walter was the first undocumented student that I met when I was in college. In awe, I just remember admiring how Walter would courageously share his story about being undocumented in public. And he was the one that helped me figure out how to get a cell phone as an undocumented person and how to navigate finding a job. We became really close friends, and together we started organizing our community and undocumented students in New York. After 9/11, Border Patrol agents gained more power, and they could ask anyone about their immigration status. Walter was on an Amtrak train from New York to Chicago, and Border Patrol agents came into that train and racially profiled all men of color. Walter was arrested, handcuffed, and taken to jail. But after 5 days, we were able to get Walter out. But that was because we took action. Our community came together to put pressure on members of Congress, to work with lawyers and faith leaders and senators and teachers, all putting pressure on ICE to release Walter and allow him to stay. This was a big turning point for my life, because I was not only relieved that Walter was able to stay and that he was released from detention, but this experience made me feel deeply in my heart that no one deserved not only to be targeted, but separated from their loved ones, jailed, and deported. I remember talking to Walter about his experience in detention, and that brought us closer together. And it was that experience that led me to commit to community organizing, to organizing immigrant youth and families to ensure that all immigrants, regardless of immigration status, can live freely and without the fear of deportation. Walter and I and other undocumented young people founded United We Dream in 2008. Our organizing and advocacy efforts led to the historic victory of the DACA program, which we campaigned for aggressively by sharing our stories, marching, leading rallies, and leading civil disobedience.
It's 9 o'clock.
Protects over 700,000 young people from deportation, just like my brother Jonathan. But this administration has dismantled the DACA program and has implemented policies that have separated children from their parents, put kids in cages, and deported immigrants en masse. So I'm sure that in my story, you can hear how policies that are voted on and decided on by policymakers and elected officials can have a direct impact on people's lives, which is why I'm so passionate, not only about organizing, but about this election. After more than 20 years in this country, Walter and I became citizens last year and are voting in our first presidential election. And Walter and I not only became committed to building a movement for immigrant justice, we also fell in love and committed to each other in that journey. This November, I'll cast my vote to defend my immigrant parents, my brother Jonathan, who has DACA, and millions of people who have been impacted by deportation detention, and family separation. Thank you.
Cristina, thank you so much for your story and for so vividly helping our listeners understand how our public policy does impact everyday people like yourself and your family. I know you worked incredibly hard on this story. Thank you. I also want to point out, you guys, Cristina has one of the most unlikely meet cutes we've ever had on this show, where she falls in love during a difficult, like during immigration and deportation, but it ends happily for her and for Walter. So hi to Walter, who's watching. With that, we'd like to hand it over to Falana.
Thanks, Megan. And I just can't believe how fast this night is going. These stories have been amazing to hear. And with that, I'm going to introduce our last teller for the night, Margaret Carter. Margaret has a story about changing the entire state of Oregon as just one of its citizens. Yeah, the floor, Margaret.
Hi, my name is Margaret Carter. Thanks so much to all of you for sharing this evening and being a part of it with me. I have served in many roles in my life, from that of a mother, a choir director, educator, to serving in the Oregon legislature. Two things that have been constant with me and near to my heart today throughout my journey was perseverance and a desire to live with purpose. You see, I left an abusive marriage in November of 1967, 2 days after getting out of hospital with a broken jawbone. Along with my small children in tow, we boarded a train in Shreveport, Louisiana, and headed to Portland, Oregon, all because of a dream. That is where I started a new life. This is where I started a new life for myself and my children. Thank God for that. I arrived here only having $100 in my pocket. My departure started a migration of my Southern roots, with 90 family members within 4 years moving to the Pacific Northwest. There were times I have to tell you, and I really did not know how I was going to make it. I worked odd jobs, went back to school, and finished my BA degree in education. Portland provided opportunity for me that I never had, because I was able to go on and secure my master's degree at well. My higher education all began at Grambling State University, where I received a scholarship from the Louisiana Education Association. As salutatorian of my class, that was the highest honor that I thought anyone could get, not expecting it to have it, not being able to, for my parents to send me to college, because my father was a minister and he didn't make a lot of money doing that in those days. But completing my degree was my highest goal, because so many people believed in me and my abilities to be a part of this new leadership of young people who were involved in Shreveport to lead our community to better opportunities. I dropped out of college and got married. But I knew from my time of growing up in the South that having an education was the only way, my only way out of poverty. I wanted my children to have better access and opportunities in higher education than I have. So I had this dream. It was more or less like a vision, where I was in this faraway place where a lot of beautiful red roses and green landscape was about. Inez Davis family, my extended family, moved in early years to Portland, and they provided me a place to stay. Yes, indeed, all 6 of us were welcomed. They helped to take good care of us. Even until this day, we are very close. I am grateful to this day for their support, for keeping the children while I work. Attend school was one of the most unselfish acts I thought a person could have ever experienced. I worked ridiculously hard to stabilize my family while showing my appreciation to my extended family for the sacrifice that they had made for us. I worked odd jobs until I got into the public school system as a teacher assistant. We moved into a house with nothing but beds for everyone and a dining room table, but thank God it was ours. I was able to apply for state services and receive food stamps to help with the grocery bills because my job only allowed me enough money to pay the household bills. By some magic opportunity, the Seroptimus Club of Portland, Oregon, along with some other white female organizations, heard about my plight and helped out with my schooling. But then I began to get paid requests to speak about my life's journey and received more financial support through speaking engagements. I made it through with lots of encouragement, enthusiasm, and an abundance of energy, and yes, prayers even more. My children were still in good hands because my niece moved from Louisiana with me to care for the kids. Diane was great to my kids and took great care of them. It is now in 1983. I'm working on the counseling faculty at Portland Community College. I was asked by a group of lobbyists to consider running for the Oregon legislature. I thought it was a joke. I thought somebody had just made the wrong phone call. Me, a Black woman in a predominantly white city, running for office? That was hard for me to believe. I didn't believe I had a chance. But I felt this little bitty thought in my head that said this was a time to go to the next level of leadership for accomplishing some of the goals I had around building strong families in our state. We were poor, but we were a strong family. Having greater access to better educational opportunities excited me. Being at the table to discuss budgets for jobs and apprenticeship program for the broader community in Oregon spoke words of wisdom to my heart. To run and to run fast. Don't get weary in well-doing. In building stronger community colleges, along with providing education to an underclass of people, resonated in my heart of hearts. We did it, folk, and I won. I was elected in 1984 as the first African-American woman to the Oregon Legislative Assembly. It was not easy, though. I had death threats against me, and a man at a campaign rally for the community got violent with me, pushing me on concrete and telling me to get out of the race, and my opponent would make me his secretary. The Democratic Socialists did not think I could represent their interests, so they campaigned against me. My sorority did not support me because another sister's husband was running for the same position, so they became neutral. I felt so alone. I felt out there by myself as the first African-American woman and the only woman that had ever won this district. But I have to tell you, I did not fear because I had a great group of people supporting me and running my campaign. Black and white folks came from across the city together and rallied for me. They saw my ability to persevere no matter the circumstances. They saw I was not afraid. I would knock on any door. Well, as a matter of fact, one night at 12 midnight, I was knocking on this person's door and they came to the door in their pajamas. I had to apologize for still working so late. In my campaign, I campaigned for education, healthcare, and job opportunities. Those issues were very, very important to me. This district needed opportunity because jobs had left the community. It was important to me to help build stronger families for the betterment of our society and our people in our community. Having more people in higher education and vocational skills training for building greater economic wealth in our community and providing health care for children in particular. That message resonated with the voters. After 14 years in the House and 12 years in the Senate, I was incredibly honored to be voted by my caucus to become the president pro tempore of the Senate and later to become the co-chair of the Senate Budget Committee. These positions allowed me to be a part of the greater conversation about the disbursement of state dollars around all the issues that I cared about. This in itself was an accomplished feat, a place where my voice could be heard on behalf of my constituents. My goal was to make life easier for people through my words, my deeds, my actions, my promises. Never mind, by now, there are 9 little kids at home waiting for me to go cook dinner. But this is a part of my purpose in life. And fulfilling my purpose makes me feel like, yes, my mission was hard, but it was accomplished. And with those 9 little children, they were never neglected at all. I went home every day and cooked a 4-course meal for them. In 1999, I was selected by the board of directors of the Urban League of Portland as its CEO, its president and CEO. And I served in that position while serving my constituents. Helping to keep the Urban League alive financially was my main goal as we entered into the 21st century. There was no way I could say no to my friends and supporters who asked me to serve so that Oregon's African-American premier organization would not die right before our eyes. Many white supporters wrote and called asking me to accept the position. 2 foundations promised if I took the position, they would send $25,000 within 2 weeks of my acceptance and would send staff for corporate community to help get the league back on track. Needless to say, the Urban League is still alive and well today and under great leadership. In 2009, I left the Oregon Senate, accepting an appointment from my very special Governor Kulongoski to be Deputy Director of the Department of Human Services alongside my wonderful friend, Dr. Bruce Goldberg. I served at the agency until my retirement from state government in 2014. Today, I am working as an advisor, yes, nearly 85 years of age, with 2 companies on their diversity and inclusion policies. This is a wonderful moment in our history where companies, along with government, have the great opportunity to capture the moment in time, to take active action for change, to make it right for the sake of human dignity and the history of this great country. Women like me, who are still full of vigor and vitality and are still seeking to contribute to society, are doing this. And I am honored to be among you. Do not allow, however, your age to be the determining factor as to what you do. Don't retire because somebody else thinks that you should retire. I wouldn't retire because I don't want the death to come along and hit me on the shoulder and say, come with me, because I'm going to be running hard until I still have work to do. No one tells Margaret Carter what I can or cannot do, not even my children, who gets worried. I am driven by my love for country and a purpose for living which supersedes anything else that tries to curtail my involvement in our great society. While many of my friends are now retired and having fun traveling across the country and taking cruises, I see myself making a difference with urgency as my fun. I do not want to leave this life without hearing that Margaret Carter made a difference. Thank you.
Margaret, thank you so much for closing our show. It is such a lesson to all of us to see you doing so much work and being such a leader at 84. I just cannot thank you enough for being part of our show.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we'd like to take a moment to invite up all of our storytellers right now and give you a chance to thank them all. We're going to do the internet wave. Alana, come up and say hello. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, everyone, for being a part of this night.
Thank you very much for inviting us. And I was so inspired by everybody. It's a moment I'll never forget.
I know I will not. I will not.
Katabatanamu to all of you, incredibly inspiring women that I've fallen in love with in the space of an hour.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Falana. I'm just beyond honored.
And how do we say thank you now?
That's what I was about to ask.
Katabaton
Oh,
Katabaton Tamawash. That's the formal way to say it.
We are going to say thank you so much, all of you, for telling your stories tonight and allowing us to receive them. We would like to say thank you so much to all of our viewers for coming on this journey with us. We appreciate you so much for commemorating the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment and women's ongoing enfranchisement. On behalf of the USA Today Network and the Storytellers Project, I hope you have a great evening, and we appreciate you from the bottom of our hearts.